Hello everyone. Today's presentation is about malware evasion techniques, and these are our group members. Malware attacks have become more sophisticated. They are not the 10 years before attacks that people were seeing. They have become more damaging. For example, ransomware encrypts your organization, even if you're backup, if they can access them, and they are becoming more difficult to detect. The detection technologies, which we will later talk in the paper, the intrusion detection system, which can be a signature based, so it's good for known attacks, but unfortunately misses the unknown attacks because they are not in those signatures. Anomaly based, that using profiles of system services and resource usage and activity, it actually trains itself and it then compares the activity. And a stateful protocol analysis, so uses information about the connection between host and compares it with the state table. So it maintains a record of connection between computer, like source IP address, etc. The DEP data execution that we know, the ASLRP, SEHOP, and the MEC, the mandatory integrity controls. So let's talk about evasion techniques. So one evasion technique is obfuscation. Obfuscation is a method of concealing the attack payload of malware, which is still common today. It's not detected by the intrusion detection system, and it's decoded and executed on the target system. How they conceal it? One is the data encoding and string manipulation. They are slightly altering the command, combining the string manipulation with character substitution by changing the data encoding. Some IDs handle this type of attack fairly good, but poorly defined signatures, IDs with poorly defined signatures might miss it. Then, as you can see in the slide, they are trying to access the passwd file in a Linux or Unix system. The encrypted session, as we know, IDs cannot read encrypted traffic, and we usually assume secure sessions are initiated by authorized users, and with the absence of mutual authentication, attackers evade IDS systems since it cannot read encrypted traffic and the payload passes through unnoticed. Polymorphic code, so it needs a mutation engine, and they are encrypted the payload. What they do, they're mutating the code while keeping the original algorithm intact. So the essential function usually remains the same. For example, if a spyware program is designed to act as a keylogger, it will continue to perform the function even though its signature changes. This typically malware is encrypted in that payload, and in the encryptor and decryptor is also added in the code. So it bypasses the IDS loaded and decoded in OS memory before the actual payload. And Dark Avenger Mutation Engine could be an example that they might use. The next slide will be my other group member.
Fragmentation overlap. Fragmentation overlap is an evasion technique that works by having one fragment overwriting data from another. Fragmentation overwrite is similar to overlap, except that the destination system, a complete fragment overwrites another fragment. And the third one is fragmentation timeouts. Fragmentation timeouts are to take advantages of the fact that the network devices maintain a limit on how long fragments are stored in the memory. All the three examples of the fragmentation are shown in the figures above. Another type of evasion technique is application-specific violations. Some applications implement protocols in different ways, not entirely enforcing RFC requirements. This may cause the same request to be made using workarounds that are inherent in the implementation. Protocol violations. This evasion technique violates RFC-defined protocols in a way the target host will handle differently than the IDS. One commonly discussed example is the remote procedure call protocol, and it inherits design flaws. Inserting traffic at IDS. This is another type of evasion technique that in which traffic is inserted at the IDS that involves sending packets that will be seen and processed by the IDS but not by the targeted host. One method of implementing this technique is by sending the packets that have a time to live that will allow them to reach the IDS but expire before reaching the target system. You see the figure that shows this example. Denial of service. IDS are usually the most resource intensive devices on the network. So IDS devices must monitor all network activity. CPU resources are used to read packets. This makes IDS devices more prone to starvation attacks. Since an IDS is generally fail open, if it is overwhelmed by denial of service attack, further attacks on the network will not only be undetected but also pass through unhindered. Code reuse attacks. The strength of these attacks lies in the fact that they don't need to inject any code because locally running processes seemingly make legitimate system requests. There are two examples of this type of attack as following. Return into libc. An attacker would change the return address on the stack to point to another function. The standard C language library is usually the target as it is loaded into every Unix program and provides useful system calls for the attacker. Return-oriented programming. It is a generalized version of the return into libc introduced by Shasham. It creates malicious computation by linking together small code snippets in an existing program's address space. Mitigations. Various malware mitigation strategies have been proposed and implemented. The approaches also vary from aiming to detect the intrusion of foreign code to methods of analyzing system and network for malicious behavior. Sandboxes, one is a security mechanism for separating running programs in a limited environment. Resources allocated for these programs are tightly controlled to contain the damage and spread of malware. Sandboxing at the end system is an appropriate defense against obfuscation techniques such as polymorphic code and encrypted sessions. Session reassembly, it is a vital component in addressing network level evasions. The fragmentation and session splicing techniques discussed earlier highlighted two important requirements for proper session reassembly at the IDS device. Firstly, the IDS must understand how network packets will be reassembled and read at the end node. Secondly, the IDS must have enough resources to do this operation during the network maximum traffic load.
Thank you, Ahmad and Muhammad. Data execution and prevention. DEP or WXORX is a security feature that marks memory either writable or executable. Most operating systems nowadays has this feature. The DEP hardware mode enforces DEP for CPUs that enables the no execute bit. In Intel processor, it's known as execute disable. For AMD, enhanced virus protection, and for ARM, execute never. Software enforced DEP is a different form of protection to the hardware enforced DEP. It is designed to block malicious codes that takes exceptions handling mechanism on the Windows platforms. DEP only prevents attackers from injecting and executing malwares on a target system. Address space layout randomization is also widely deployed or widely used defense mechanism, which is introduced by the PAX team in 2003. It creates randomness in the memory addresses of the target system or the target process. From security point of view, it is difficult for attackers to find the areas that they want to attack because the search space is made very large. Every time the program is restarted, the address space layout is randomized to prevent attackers from using the same exploit code against that vulnerability. ASLR can be bypassed by heap or just-in-time spraying of the process heap. Spraying generates the appropriate data on the heap to overwhelm the ASLR. A combination of techniques or such as ROP in heap spraying can be considered as a sophisticated attack. Control flow integrity or CFI ensures that whether the behavior of the program are according to the design or not. CFI mechanisms embedded in software is practical but can impact performance overhead. It is a good defense approach to addressing ROP threats. Windows 8 ROP mitigation. In Windows 8, Microsoft introduced a number of malware mitigation features, including enhanced kernel protection, adding integrity checks in the heap, virtual functions, stable guards in Internet Explorer, and increased ASLR randomness. One protection mechanism for a virtual memory attempts to mitigate ROP malware is by checking if the stack pointer falls within the range defined by the threat environment block or TEB. Analysis. In analysis, we have future evasion techniques and future of mitigation. As stated, evasion techniques are refined to make malware less identifiable continuously. An example of code reuse techniques is that how traditional code injection defense can be easily bypassed by the malware developers. Due to this reason, layers of complexity are added when the techniques are used in combination, such as packed, printable, and polymorphic return-oriented programming. Evasion techniques might continue to be much more trickier. In the table, various evasion techniques and attempts are shown to provide values based on the sophistication, difficulty to detect, and impact in their comparisons. The code use attacks presents the greatest threats because it is very difficult to detect and mitigate. However, these attacks are still considered sophisticated and difficult to implement by the average malware writer. This could change in the future with more documentation being shared on the public hacker forums. As you see, obfuscation and fragmentation are shown less sophisticated and easier to detect. Malware evasion techniques are developing rapidly, and still vendors are behind in this race. Various techniques related to malware to evade detections by security systems are discussed in this paper, such as obfuscation, fragmentation, incision splicing, application-specific violations, protocol violations, inserting traffic at the IDS, code use attacks. Also, the mitigation mechanisms such as sandboxing, session reassembly, data execution prevention, address space layout randomization, control flow integrity. These are all discussed in this paper. The sophistication of evasion techniques used by attackers nowadays should encourage vendors to adopt more robust approach in providing stronger security mechanisms such as control flow integrity or CFI. In addition to that, organizations should be aware of that standalone IDS implementation is not enough to provide security and keep their assets safe and sound. This was the presentation, and thank you for your time. Have a great time.